This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Intense clashes erupted between rebels and Somali government and Ethiopian forces in a number of neighborhoods in the Somali capital of Mogadishu. The clashes extended to neighborhoods in northern and southern Mogadishu, forcing thousands of residents to flee their homes to safer areas.
The clashes erupting in neighborhoods throughout the Somali capital of Mogadishu gave residents no other option than to flee. A large number of families, reaching the thousands, have left their homes in search for safer areas. It appears that the intensity of fighting has been increasing. In separate parts of the capital, violent clashes were renewed between rebels and Somali government forces backed by the Ethiopian army. The confrontations extended to northern Mogadishu, which had not been affected by previous violence. The residents say that both sides in the confrontations are using heavy weapons, including artillery shells, forcing most of them to flee their homes, while the others are caught in the crosshairs of the gunfire. In the southern capital, armed government and Ethiopian forces attacked a command center in the former headquarters of the Somali Defense Ministry, triggering clashes between the two sides. Armed men were seen deploying into the streets and taking up positions in some of the capital's alleyways.
We are defending Islam and our country from the non-believers and those who cooperate with them. God willing, we will be victorious.
These developments come after Mogadishu witnessed a bloody day when more than 20 people were killed, including soldiers, and nearly 100 others were injured. Many of the bodies were dragged through the streets after an attack that targeted for the Ethiopian army. The Somali government said that it is determined to impose security and law in Mogadishu within a week. The Interior Minister stated that his government will defeat the rebels, who he describes as enemies of peace in Somalia.
Pakistan announced testing a cruise missile capable of carrying nuclear warheads and avoiding radar detection. An official in the Pakistani military said that the testing of the cruise missile, which can be launched from the land or the air, was successful. He added that the missile Babur or Hatf-7 has a range of 700 kilometers and resembles the U.S. Tomahawk missile. The Al-Arabiya reporter in Pakistan said that based on knowledgeable sources, Islamabad is now developing another version of Babur with an expected range of 1,000 kilometers. The Pakistani president affirmed his country's enhanced capability of facing external challenges.
The Pakistani army is more equipped now than ever before on both the conventional and non-conventional levels. We have the capability to face any external challenge. Pakistan strives to live peacefully and harmoniously on the basis of dignity, pride, and national sovereignty. We do not have any intention of attacking anyone, but we maintain the right to defend ourselves. Thus, the Pakistani army is an army of peace, and everything we develop is to protect and defend ourselves, which is the right of every nation. The discussions between UN Security Council members over the draft resolution calling for tighter sanctions against Tehran because of its nuclear program have been returned to square one. The draft resolution has generated a lot of controversy. The 5 permanent members, along with Germany, have been trying to move forward, but the ongoing negotiations inside the Security Council seem to have set them back.
The new draft resolution, which was prepared by Germany, the current secretary of the United Nations Security Council's 5 permanent members, was amended. But non-permanent members, South Africa, Qatar and Indonesia, took the negotiations in a different direction. This forced the United Nations Security Council's 15 members to enter a new round of negotiations looking for a middle ground solution to narrow the gap between them. South Africa, which currently presides over the United Nations Security Council, suggested limiting the sanctions to items linked to nuclear activities, as well as extending the deadline for 90 days before imposing any sanctions on Iran. These suggestions were considered counterproductive to what the draft resolution was set to achieve, imposing sanctions on all Iran's weapons exports, as well as imposing financial restrictions on Iranian officials and institutions. The South African suggestions have derailed the anticipated consensus among leading countries, but the French ambassador to the United Nations said that he still has hope that an agreement can be reached by the end of the week. Iranians living in exile are calling on the United Nations to pass this draft resolution as soon as possible. Hardline Iranian officials continue their defiance, which was reflected by threats made by the Supreme Leader Khamenei, who said that Iran would respond against any attack. This leads one to believe that trying to persuade Iran to change its position is as hard as splitting Iraq.
President Ahmadinejad says the way major powers are showing to the world is not the only path nations need to step into to secure progress and development. The president told the IRIB on Thursday big powers are unwilling to let the Iranian nation exercise its legal right. He said the Security Council has begun to risk its legitimacy in defending the rights of nations, adding the performance of bullying powers has questioned the working of the world body. Ahmadinejad went on to say Iran's case was discussed in the UN Security Council 3 times throughout the course of history, adding Tehran could emerge victorious each time despite growing pressures by the hegemonic powers. He continued Western powers have staged psychological warfare, but they know their attempts will eventually hit a snag. On his trip to New York, President Ahmadinejad said the exact time of his trip still remains unclear. Earlier in the day, President Ahmadinejad paid a visit to a Tehran orphanage where he again disputed the legitimacy of the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council is to open another round of negotiations on a draft resolution on Iran's nuclear case in a while. It comes after a formal meeting of the Security Council on Wednesday, which discussed recently proposed amendments made by Indonesia, Qatar, and South Africa. The US, Britain, and France showed objection to a South African proposal to have a 90-day delay in slapping additional sanctions on Iran. Here is what the U.S. and South African ambassadors told reporters on the outcome of the meeting.
We had a good discussion. 3 members introduced suggestions for amendments. We had brief discussion about those. A number of us indicated that we would look at them in the spirit of consistency with the conceptual architecture we have through the previous resolution, 1737 and 1696, and where we could provide further clarity and improve the text. We would certainly be open to that.
The principle behind this is very simple, that when the resolution introduces when the Security Council introduces a resolution, it should be specific about what it addresses. We've said this resolution doesn't seem to be specific in what it is. The problem is the nuclear program, and this resolution, we see it addressing other things as well. So we've asked them to clarify on that. This resolution does, in our mind, does not reaffirm the role of the IEA, who are the only ones who can tell us about what's happening on the ground. We've asked them to clarify that.
Follow up. And Iran's ambassador to the United Nations says the condition that the UN will remove its anti-Iran sanctions only when Tehran suspends its uranium enrichment is not acceptable. Mohammad Javad Zarif, who was speaking at a conference on Iran policy via video link, stressed, quote, "This is a serious issue that requires a serious solution, which is definitely not suspension." The plan that envisages sanctions removal for enrichment suspension has been recently brought up by some diplomats as a way out of Iran's current nuclear standoff. The U.S. has informed India it is opposed to the building of a pipeline to carry gas from Iran to India via Pakistan. U.S. Energy Secretary Samuel Bodman said it was made clear at the highest levels of the Indian government that the U.S. opposes the development of the Iranian pipeline to India, arguing it flies in the face of U.S. interests. Iran, India, and Pakistan are engaged in negotiations to build a pipeline that will supply Iranian natural gas to Pakistan and India to meet their rapidly growing energy needs. The proposed 2,600-kilometer pipeline will cost an estimated $8 billion.
France 2 and France 5 television networks aired an interview conducted by French journalist Thierry Tollier with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
Does Bashar Assad's Syria support Iran's nuclear ambition?
Of course we support it if the nuclear program is peaceful, as they say. According to international law, this is Iran's right. There are no indications that Iran is trying to develop nuclear weapons. Therefore, according to international law, Iran, like all other countries, has this right.
What if Iran develops a nuclear bomb? Would this be acceptable by you?
We submitted a draft resolution to the UN Security Council in 2003 calling for a Middle East free of weapons of mass destruction. Therefore, in principle, we are opposed to the possession of nuclear weapons or any other similar weapons by any country. We oppose this kind of weapons by any country, including Israel. Israel has nuclear weapons. The UN resolution should apply to everyone. We cannot apply it selectively or according to our whims. We can't apply it to one country and ignore it when it comes to another country.
Est-ce que vous comprenez aussi que, vu de France notamment, le soutien à un président...
Do you agree with the statement that was made by Ahmadinejad when he said that he will wipe Israel from the face of the earth? Of course you know what the French reaction was.
ستكون ردة فعل الفرنسيين على مثل هذه التصريحات.
Ces propos-là vous paraissent inacceptables.
If you want to talk about this statement, you also must consider another statement in which he said that Iran does not pose a threat to anyone. Why are we considering only one statement and ignoring the other? This is my first point. The second point is that we must make judgments based on countries' policies. As politicians, our statements can be influenced by certain situations. What is important are our policies. In addition, there are important religious and political Israeli figures who talked about using nuclear bombs against Arabs and eliminating the Palestinians and made other similar statements. We can't isolate actions and reactions from each other.
As a person, do you criticize Ahmadinejad's statements?
No, I don't criticize the statements because they are only one small part of the picture. We have to talk about the big picture, not only about one small part of it. This is not an objective approach in politics. We must look at the whole picture. We also must look at the other side. The Israelis are more extremist in both their statements and actions. At least Iran is not killing Israelis while Israel has been killing Palestinians, Lebanese and Syrians. There is a big difference. You have to look at the whole picture.
Vous en parlez. Est-ce qu'il existe, comme l'a révélé...
Since you mentioned Israel, are there secret negotiations between Syria and Israel?
بين سوريا وإسرائيل.
D'un autre côté.
No, we totally refuse secret negotiations in principle. Why do we have to hide anything? If we were talking about peace, we don't have to hide it from the people. The people support peace. Why do we have to hide peace talks from them? This is one point. The second one is the fact that the peace process needs public support. Regardless of what can be reached in secret negotiations, at the end, an agreement has to be signed and it must be ratified by the people. If there is no public support for the negotiations, then there will be no public support for the agreement. Therefore, you can't reach a positive result through secret negotiations and you can't sign the reached agreement.
So are you willing to make peace with Israel?
Of course, this is one of our clear positions and we will not change it.
Well, in diplomatic developments, U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, who sets off tomorrow on a Mideast tour that will bring her to Egypt, Israel and Jordan, intends to cut nearly half of the funding request for PA Chairman Mahmoud Abbas's security force. Rice was testifying before a congressional panel discussing the international affairs budget for next year. She told the panel there are concerns over how some of the money would be spent. Since agreement was reached over the new Palestinian government, which includes Hamas, Congress has been holding up Rice's original $86 million request for the Presidential Security Force. Several congressional members fear some of the money could reach Hamas, which is classified in the United States as a terror group.
We are working right now with the Palestinians on the firewall issue, on making sure that that funding is going to forces that are on the right side of this struggle. And I have absolutely no interest in having to come here one day and say, you know, this funding didn't end up in the right place. I will do my very, very best. I don't want to promise something that I can't promise.
And staying with Condoleezza Rice, IBA's Jonathan Elkins asked a top advisor to former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, Dr. Anand Gissin, just how significant Rice's upcoming visit to the region will be.
You don't make much of Prime Minister Olmert's comments that he's willing to make painful concessions.
Well, I think this is the sort of the vernacular that, you know, it's become customary every time Secretary of State comes here to sing the songs that will be accepted by the United States and definitely maybe by the moderate Arab countries. Now, I mean, it makes sense, you know, since the United States wants to establish a coalition of moderate Arab countries, so-called moderate Arab countries, you know, Israel has to pay its part and do its service and talk again about making concessions and making that, maybe to cajole the Arabs to come and join in the effort against Iran. But I caution, and I say again, Israel cannot pay the full price for containing Iran. Israel will not be the canary bird, you know, that will be sent down the shaft in order to find out how deadly the Iranian threat is. I think everyone has to contribute, and I think our position and the position of the United States should be that, yes, if you want to stop the Iranian threat, talking to the Saudis, talking to the Egyptian, there's some things that you have to do. And you can't play the old game of putting the blame on Israel, you know, saying, Israel, you're the Mikey of the world, you will eat everything, you will do everything. No, we're no longer, that's no longer the case, by the way. This is a different world, and the threat is global. And those countries have a responsibility to themselves, to their own people, to do something about this threat. And regardless of what the Israeli position is, we will do our share, I'm sure, and we will do our share. But we won't do our share by making more concessions to the Arabs at this stage.
In Gaza, dozens of Palestinians today staged a demonstration demanding the release of kidnapped BBC reporter Alan Johnston. All Palestinian factions and journalists working in the area have condemned the abduction of the British journalist by Palestinian gunmen on March 12th. There will be no timeout on UN sanctions against Iran. That was the joint announcement of the US, Britain and France, making it clear that they would not agree to the 90-day freeze proposed by South Africa. The US also rejected proposed amendments by Indonesia and Qatar that call for a nuclear-free Middle East because of the implications for Israel.
This idea that we could have timeout, but 90 days would buy time. We've been actually in negotiation on this issue for in excess now of 3 years. The Council first adopted a presidential statement in April last year. Between 1696 and 1737, there were 4 months. And in those 4 months, we have the prospect of negotiations if Iran had actually signaled its acceptance. It didn't, and every time we paused, Iran then came around and said the pause was terribly useful because we were able to develop and enhance our nuclear capability. Well, there's no point in actually doing that. What we are in the business of saying now is we have obligations, we expect Iran to meet those obligations.
Protesting the abduction of the BBC reporter Alan Johnston, the journalist syndicate in Gaza organized today a massive strike in front of the Legislative Council, participated by a number of journalists and reporters of media channels and agencies.
Since the BBC correspondent in Gaza, Alan Johnston, disappeared in Gaza City a week ago, there have been calls from politicians and colleagues for his immediate release. As the BBC is pointing out today, there was still no independent confirmation that Alan Johnston has been kidnapped. The hope will be that now a new Palestinian government has at least been formed. Alan Johnston's suspected abduction can move back to the top of the regional agenda. Earlier, the BBC said it now seemed certain the reporter had been abducted. The BBC's Middle East Bureau Chief Simon Wilson said he was disappointed there was no firm news, adding it was time to redouble efforts to find him. On Saturday, Palestinian journalists demonstrated outside Parliament in Gaza City in support of the correspondent. Palestinian security officials say Mr. Johnston was kidnapped from his car by masked gunmen last Monday. The BBC said it has no official information about who may be holding Mr. Johnston or where he is being kept. President Mahmoud Abbas and Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh are among those who have called for Mr. Johnston's release. He has been the BBC's correspondent in the Gaza Strip for the past 3 years and the only foreign journalist from a major media organization based in Gaza. The BBC described him as highly experienced and respected reporter. Mr. Johnston, 44 years old, was born in Tanzania and educated in Scotland. He joined the BBC World Service in 1991 and has spent 8 of the last 16 years as correspondent, including periods in Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. His Gaza posting was due to come to an end at the end of next month.
And now we have live with us Mr. Simon Wilson, the BBC Middle East Bureau Chief. Mr. Simon, good evening.
Good evening.
Sir, said that you have no independent confirmation that Mr. Alan Johnston has been kidnapped. What information do you have, and what are the channels through which you get information in this respect?
That's right. It's now 8 days since Alan Johnston went missing in Gaza, and every indication is that he's been abducted, but we have no independent confirmation of that. We've been in contact with the authorities here. I've personally been to see the Prime Minister and the President and the heads of some of the security services, and we continue to receive assurances, but there is no independent confirmation of that, and inevitably after 8 days that is a great cause of concern for the BBC and for Alan's family.
Sir, how do you evaluate the efforts carried by the PNA to secure the release of Mr. Johnston?
Well, we're very grateful for all the efforts that are being made. Since day one, we've had assurances that everything possible is being done, and I have had assurances from people who say that they believe that Alan is fine. Obviously, after 1 week, not to have any news is a matter of concern for us, and therefore we are asking everyone to do everything possible. And as your report mentioned, we're hopeful that now that there's a unity government in place, everybody will be able to concentrate their efforts and try to find Alan and return him to us and to his family.
Sir, after this sad incident, do you think that might affect the presence of the BBC journalist in the Gaza Strip? Would that stop the BBC journalists from coming, or?
Well, the BBC is very committed to reporting Gaza, as you mentioned in your report. We're the only major international news organisation which based a foreign journalist here throughout the last 5 years, and Alan Johnston was here for 3 years. We really hope that we'll be able to continue that. Obviously, at the moment, all our efforts are going into finding Alan. But the intention is to replace Alan with another correspondent, a foreign correspondent, who will work as the situation allows. And also let me remind you that, like a number of foreign organisations, we have a very talented team of local staff who work here gathering news for us, for radio, for television and for online. And even when it's not possible for us to have a foreign correspondent based here, we continue to report using our excellent local staff.
The Egyptian media is covering many issues relating to the recent constitutional amendments. A group of magazines and media outlets organized a conference to debate these amendments, specifically those relating to women and their political participation in Egypt.
The issue of the constitutional amendment concerning women and what to do after these changes are implemented were discussed during a seminar that was attended by experts, thinkers, as well as specialists in the law and women's affairs. During the conference, participants discussed Article 62 and its amendment, which states that it is permissible to specify a minimum number of women representatives in both the People's Assembly and the Shura Council.
The word permissible in the amendment, does this mean that this article can be implemented sometimes and ignored other times? The legal experts say the answer is no, because the article also applies to parties. The article applies to both political parties and women. It is impossible for the parliament not to reserve a minimum number of seats for political parties.
During the seminar, the female attendees debated the confusion surrounding the amendments and the reasons behind using the word permissible in the article demanding the Egyptian Parliament reserve a minimum number of seats for women rather than using clear language to specify an exact number of seats. They also discussed further steps to be taken before the law is passed in order to urge lawmakers to pass legislation ensuring that women have political representation in Parliament in a way that reflects their numbers in society and contribution to the Egyptian gross national product.
Women are key partners in development. I want to mention that the Arab Humanitarian Development Report that was released in 2005 made a very wonderful statement. It stated that the Arab nation will not rise unless women rise first. So we have to keep this sentence in our minds and really try to encourage women to take on roles that better reflect their capabilities, especially Egyptian women, because Egyptian women have had a long history in political struggle.
The female attendees also emphasized the importance of exerting maximum efforts to urge members of society, both men and women, to participate in the referendum on the amendments to the Constitution, which is scheduled for March 26th.
The amendments have already passed. Our only hope is in the future. God willing, we will rally as many women as possible to vote on the referendum to show the parliament that we represent 50% of the Egyptian population. So it must at least give us 30 or 20% of the parliamentary seats. I urge every woman to make her voice heard in Egypt on March 26th, the day of the referendum, to come and vote, God willing.
Many citizens, especially women, are putting their hopes in these constitutional amendments, which were unanimously passed in the People's Assembly. Through these amendments, women hope to achieve their tangible political participation. The real test is how these amendments will be implemented on the ground.
The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. Please visit linktv.org/Mosaic for more information about these broadcasters, or to view previous Mosaic programs, obtain program transcripts, or receive the weekly Mosaic Intelligence Report. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, and by committed Link TV viewers like you. If you value this program, please send your tax-deductible contribution to Link TV, either through the website or the mailing address listed on your screen. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.